After this loss to the Utah Jazz, the Chicago Bulls sit in a place where a lot of the early kind of outlook on the Chicago Bulls have changed for a lot of fans. We're going to talk a little bit about that, how the Bulls kind of their problems and issues were really loud in that game against the Utah Jazz. We're also going to talk about, are the Bulls really as committed to Matas Buzelis' development as he says? Has he just really not been that good? We're going to get into all those things and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host there, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today, y'all. I want to start off talking about kind of my takeaways from this game. I know we've already broke down the game, but I'm going to get into how they kind of more so talk to the Bulls' kind of issues so far in this season for the Chicago Bulls. And one is another early deficit. After being down 20 in back-to-back games against the Memphis Grizzlies and the Orlando Magic last week, you look at 17 against Brooklyn on Friday, and then you come out and get 15. I guess you could say at least the double-digit deficits are getting smaller and smaller after two 20-point deficits, a 17-point deficit, and now a 15-point deficit. But the Bulls got to get it together in this early start thing, right? And despite tying the Utah Jazz in the second half of the game, the teams were tied in how much they scored in the second half of those games. Another slow start really signified the doom for the Chicago Bulls in this game again. And Billy Donovan talked about it. He said this: I think a lot of times we're going to come out and be a lot more aggressive, and certainly I think it starts defensively. If you're able to get stops, that generally allows you to get into transition and generate some easy baskets. But I think that for us, we've got to come with a better mentality to start games, because I think that's what happening is this game is going on and we're adjusting to it instead of it just coming out and trying to be aggressive. And I couldn't say it any better myself, right? And Billy Donovan has always been good at kind of identifying things. The changing of things is a different story for Billy Donovan. But the Bulls have to come out with better starts. Like, you cannot keep coming out and get into double-digit deficits and expect to win games, because you're putting yourself out to a huge hole. So the Bulls have to come out with more energy. And yes, I know that they were missing Zach LaVine, but they don't get any credit for that in this game for me, because the Jazz were missing Jordan Clarkson and Lauri Markkanen, their two best scorers. So you got to be better than that. You got to come out with better energy in a game, like in games, period, right? And so that's going to be something interesting to start. It's always been something with a Billy Donovan team, right? When you look at it, when it comes down to it, either you've had the times where like second quarters were terrible for the Bulls, then it was third quarters that were terrible for the Bulls. Like, we got to be a better complete four-quarter team. And of course, you're going to have your quarters where the other team goes on runs, or maybe you get a little bit down, but like, to come out of so many halves, out of a 7-game season so far, 4 of those games you've gotten out to double-digit deficits to start the game. You cannot do that, right? So the Bulls have to really try to get that in order and in gear as this season goes on, if they want to be able to be in more games. That slow start, you got to get that shit together. Then on top of that, playing down to the competition. This is another thing that to me has been a problem the entire time that Billy Donovan has been here. I'm not necessarily blaming it 100% on Billy Donovan. The players got to execute. We do got to adjust better. But like, the fact of the matter is that we got wins against Memphis. We got wins against Orlando. We got wins against these teams. But we're losing to the Brooklyn Nets and the winless up until that point Utah Jazz. That's, to me, it's unacceptable, right? And the Bulls have to find a better a way to be better than that. Then you got to come up and you got to get up for the teams that you're playing against. The teams in the NBA are not taking it lightly on you. And while you of course, there are teams that are way better than others and teams that have a talent deficit, we still don't really know who this Bulls team is. And I almost did not put that on this list of saying playing down to competition, because we really don't know where this Bulls team is yet. Yes, this is a team that has some talent, but we've always been a team that's had some talent, and we've always kind of hovered around the mid, right? So we'll see as the season goes on what that means, but we got to get this shit together. We have to get it together, and when you keep playing down to teams that are supposed to be closer, right, or whatever it is, like, you shouldn't be losing. You shouldn't be giving up 130 points to a team that hadn't averaged even 100 points on the season. You're playing down to your competition. And really, it comes back down to this part as well, right? The Bulls just they had no edge. There is no edge to this team at times. Now, there are times we're front runners. You see, when this Bulls team is out to lead or they've gone on a big offensive run, like we do have an edge at that point. We have an identity at that point, but it's fleeting, right? We got to be more consistent in how we go about business. We got to be more consistent about how we go about our execution, right? And that's the one thing with this team that really stands out loudly is that this team right now is a vibe team, meaning when they are playing with a lead or they're getting out, like we've seen it before as well in the early part of the season, when they get into like a defensive rhythm, there's a little bit of edge to this team defensively. You see this team kind of step up and fight over screens, and they're competing hard, and even a player like Josh Giddey will step up a bit and make some defensive plays, but it's all when they're playing with the momentum or with the energy. They don't really have a good job at gaining that momentum and energy. And so, we have to be a team, and whether that's we got to be better offensively to start, which feeds into then our confidence defensively, or vice versa, whatever it is, we got to be a better team about having an edge to ourselves. Keontae George and John Collins, they both had the needed edge to push the Utah Jazz despite missing Lauri Markkanen. The Bulls, despite missing Zach LaVine, did not have that. Nikola Vucevic played a great game. I want to be clear here. Vooch gets a huge credit for me. Ayo Dosunmu played good throughout most of the game as well. And, I got to give some credit to Dalen Terry. He tried to even talk some shit to John Collins. But at the end of the day, John Collins got some height on you and about 40 pounds, my boy. Like, there's only so much that you can do at that point in time. So, like, the Bulls you got to have a better edge. You got to have a better execution. Like, we do not have an identity, and it's glaring in times like this because there are some teams that if they were to get out to lead against a opponent like the Utah Jazz or like the Brooklyn Nets, their edge, their identity, their process would help push them over the top. The Bulls have none of that at this point. So they got to try to find a way to gain that. Of course, it's not as simple as flipping a switch. I don't mean to present it as that, but it does need to be a concerted effort from this coaching staff and this player group to get yourself in gear, right? And so when you look at just how Keontae George and the confidence that he was, and it's not like Keontae George shot an amazing percentage from the field. He ended up making like 9 field goals, and 3 of those were from the three-point range, right? But he got to the free throw line. He was aggressive, right? You got to be consistently aggressive. And so he made 8 field goals. 6 of those were three-pointers, right? And so you got to play with it and find your identity. And that's something that has really plagued this Bulls team for the last 4 or 5 years. We aren't a team that really has an identity. Other than struggle, it's been no identity for this Bulls team. And some people could put that on coaching. Some people can put that on the players. I say it's all of it, right? You have to have an edge about yourself. And when you face off against a team that discovers that edge, the Brooklyn Nets did it with Cam Thomas. The Utah Jazz did it in this game with Keontae George and John Collins. When you don't have that or you can't discover it, it's really glaring when you face off against a team that does have it or does discover it in that game. And I'm not here to say that this Utah Jazz team has been this team that's had this immaculate edge throughout the course of the season, but they found it in this game. Now the Brooklyn Nets sit at 4-4. They've beat they're much ahead of most people's expectations for them to start the season, and they have had that. So the team got to get it together, man. They beat the Grizzlies last night. Like, yeah, the Brooklyn Nets beat the Grizzlies last night. At some point, people maybe got to start switching how they talk about the Brooklyn Nets, but nonetheless, but yeah, you got to be better. You got to find an edge, and then of course the thing that's been loud for the Bulls this whole time is the defense. Giving up over 130 points to a team that came in here averaging less than 100, you got to figure it out. Billy Donovan saying this. The one-on-one situations where a guy's just in space, we have to have more resistance there in terms of being able to at least guard the first dribble or two. It's very difficult, and there's just a straight line drive, which is why the Bulls are giving up almost 60 points in the paint per game so far. And then I think this last part that he ended it in was very, very telling. There's not Alex Caruso out there, but I think we collectively can be better. There's no Alex Caruso out there, but I think that we can collectively be better, right? And that is, one of the things that we knew coming into the season. You lost 2 of your best defenders. Andre Drummond and Alex Caruso aren't walking through that door. And in replace of that, and this is where a lot of the kind of criticism about Patrick Williams gets loud, right, is that Patrick Williams is out there for defense. But his defense last night, and while he had a solid offensive game, and I got to give Patrick Williams some credit for that, a minuscule amount of credit for that, John Collins completely and utterly outclassed him. That's the matchup that Patrick Williams should be as the defensive person in this starting lineup, as the defensive player. Him and Ayo, Jalen Smith, they're the two defensive guys, right? There are three defensive guys, and Jalen Smith isn't even that great of an on-ball defender at all. He's more weak side, things like that. But if those guys can't collectively look at it and say, we got to do something about John Collins, how much are they really adding with their defense, right? And that's been one of the criticisms, even for people who hear that Patrick Williams' defense and how versatile he's been. It's like, all right, cool. But in a game where we needed that new added weight, that 236, 38-pound frame of Patrick Williams, we needed every bit of that against John Collins, and we got none of it when it mattered the most. This Bulls team defensively is garbage, right? And to say what you want to say about the defense, like they've had their moments, and I get it, where they rank a defensive rating, all that type of shit, but when it comes down to it, this Bulls team gives up the middle. It gives up the paint. And those are efficient shots. And guess what? When you give up the paint and allow dunks or things like that, that also builds the confidence part of other teams, right? And that's where you start falling into the pit of hell, where if a team builds confidence because they're getting to the rim easily, it sucks. The Bulls are in the bottom 5. They are 25th in points allowed per game and 119. They're almost giving up 120 points per game. And while their offense has been cool, we're only averaging 115 points. That means that the Bulls are again, the deficits are huge for the Bulls. The Bulls have to find a way to play better team defense. And Quentin had him over on Locked On Bulls yesterday. He pointed out something great. The Bulls have no communicators out there on the defensive side of the ball. You know what Alex Caruso brought even more than his versatility? His ability to call out what the other team is doing. And Lonzo could do that, but again, we know Lonzo, he's not playing back-to-backs. He's on a minutes restriction. He's out right now. So you need to find that somewhere else on your team. And until the Bulls do that, listen, it's going to be a lot more games like this than games that we saw early in the season where the Bulls are rocking and rolling. That's just going to be the case and scenario that we're going to see. So the Bulls have to get that shit together, right? Defense. I talked about it on yesterday's episode, how everybody is all saying the right, like all the players are saying the right things that need to be done defensively, but saying the right things and executing them are very, very different things, and this team is not executing it well at all. So, those are just the things that have really, as far as the deficit for the Bulls, that just keep plaguing the Bulls. The early deficits, we got to get that together. Playing down to the competition, again, we'll really see how that goes to see where this Bulls team is, having no identity, no edge when it matters the most, and the defense. Those are things that I'm telling you right now, despite the offensive flow that this team can get in, despite the exciting offense that this team can play at times, despite all of that, if you lack all of these things and you do it consistently, this team, despite with the offense and the three-point shooting, all of that, we're going to be a lottery team. Now, are we going to be far enough back in the lottery to secure our own pick? That's a story for another day. But if this team cannot do those things, the lottery is heading towards it. That brings me to my next topic. And this is something that, again, through 7 games, maybe it can change. But if the Bulls do manage to trade Zach LaVine and or Nikola Vucevic, you better be prepared. At that point, this team is struggling. This team is a talented team. We have pieces other than Zach LaVine, other than Nikola Vucevic. I want to be clear here. And no way am I saying that these are the only 2 talented guys. Everything else, every other player sucks and they don't matter. No, I'm not saying that. But we don't have the needed pieces to really compete in the NBA, especially if those guys are gone. We just don't have it. We don't have it, right? And so we don't execute. We're not going to make a serious run without those guys. Those guys are, when you look at Vooch, he was the best Bull on the court in a lot of games, but especially in last night. When you look at Zach LaVine and what the edge that he does bring in scoring-wise, it's needed for the Chicago Bulls team. If the Bulls right now, from what we've seen so far, if the Bulls were to trade Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic and not get any type of win-now pieces back, this would be a team that would still play a fun brand of basketball, fun style of basketball. They would still have some good pieces in Josh Giddey, Kobe White, Ayo. These are interesting players to watch, right? Make no mistake about it. But we don't have the necessary cohesion. We don't have the necessary edge. We don't have the necessary depth. We don't have the necessary anything. Like, we would be a young team that is growing and developing. I still like Julian Phillips. I still like Dalen Terry. I still like Matas Buzelis. More on that in a second. But we wouldn't have the needed, really, components to really even compete in the play-in tournament. We just wouldn't. And so, for coming into this, and this is not to say that, listen, Kobe and Ayo, definitely elevated this team last year. Make no mistake about it. But they also elevated it with the DeMar DeRozan being on this team, right? And so this team has added some things that they were missing then. But if this Bulls team truly can get off of, if they do trade Zach, if they do trade Vooch, if they do trade, Torrey Craig, it's not really an impact for the Bulls, but like these are things that really could happen. And if the Bulls are, which is some thought process, I'm not saying that they are not. I don't fucking know. I'm going to be 100% honest with y'all. I have no idea what the goal of this front office is yet this season. I don't know. I know that they want to see if these young guys can be in a place of being competitive. I trust that. And I do think that they are willing, if this team looks competitive enough to not worry about their top 10 pick. I do think that, but I'm not saying that that's where they are yet. I don't know that they've seen enough, and they may not see enough, right? But leading between now and the trade deadline, if Vooch and Zach LaVine continue to play the way that they are, and the Bulls decide to use that to maybe, if a team does call and has better value, to move those guys, for those that thought that this team was going to compete for a play-in, that this team was going to avoid, and for the Bulls fans to say keeping the top 10 pick needs to be a priority for this team, you could realistically start seeing that be the case, right? And that's, again, I'm not saying that that's where we are right now. We got to see how it goes over this season, but, we'll see, because the Bulls got Dallas and Minnesota coming up in back-to-back games Wednesday and Thursday. And, if this team, again, continues to be that bipolar Bulls team to where they come out and beat one of, if not both those teams, and then turn around and, lose to Atlanta on Saturday, it's going to be that, and that's, you know what? That is what it is. And that's why so many people have so much angst and anxiety about where this team is going to be, because, listen, the highs are the highs, right? And the lows are the lows. But it seems like this front office really buys more into the highs and kind of ignores the lows at times. I from what I've seen so far about AK, if the Bulls wins against Memphis, wins against Orlando, wins against Milwaukee, even though they're struggling, if we turn around and win against Dallas, win against Minnesota, I think that this front office will look at that and say, see, we're close. But then they'll ignore the losses to Brooklyn, the losses to Utah, right? The losses to teams like that. And, that comes back to the question about the direction of this franchise, especially by your front office, that a lot of people have. And we'll see where that ends up leading this team. I tell you what. It could get darker, y'all. I'm telling y'all right now, this can get a lot darker for the Chicago Bulls. I'm more of an optimistic person. I have my pessimism, of course. I still have this team pegged to win between 30 and 35 games, right? But we'll see where this team sits right now. But it's going to be leading into the trade deadline, and as this season goes on, it's going to be really, really interesting to see how much Vooch and Zach LaVine can keep it up, if that makes teams be more in on them than out, and then what does AK and Eversley do at that point in time and decide to the direction they decide to put this team on. Now, talking about direction, that leads us to our last topic today. So after Matas Buzelis was sent down to the G League, the word around it that they were still committed to the development of Matas Buzelis. And then in a game like yesterday, right, against the Utah Jazz, where you were missing Zach LaVine, where you're missing, of course, already Lonzo Ball, you're missing those players, that we saw Matas Buzelis play less minutes than what he played when Zach LaVine was in games. Now, I do think that comes down to THT. He was given a lot of great energy, didn't shoot the ball overly effectively, but he was getting to the free throw line, those type of things. He was rebounding well. He was passing the ball well. He was getting active defensively. And I can see Billy Donovan looking at that and saying, all right, Matas, this isn't your game, right? THT is cooking. Let's go with the hot hand. And I think some Bulls fans as well, if you say that you want Billy Donovan to go the hot hand more, then he needs to go to the hot hand more, even if that means not going to your favorite rookie. But the question still holds out there is that what is the plan for Matas Buzelis? Because right now, he's out there just getting cardio in. He's out there standing in the corner. You're not running any actions for him. You're not really having him do anything that plays to his strengths. He's just out there. He's just out there. And my hope was, and it was to the, a lot of Bulls fans didn't agree with this, but my hope was that, all right, cool. If we're going to send him down to the G, right, to the G League, to the Windy City Bulls, at least at that point, you're going to run options for him. You're going to run actions for him, I should say. You're going to run plays for him. He's going to get between 12 and 15 shots. He's going to be able to work on his mechanics of the game. He's going to be able to work and adjust to the physicality and things that he needs. And I know Bulls fans have said, but he played in the G League last year. The G League Ignite was a farce. And that's why they shut it down. Because it was like putting together a bunch of teams, a bunch of the best players from AAU and just tell him to go out there and figure it out. It's not the same if he goes down there to the Windy City Bulls. He's going to have a plan, and he's going to be prioritized. And it's just not, the Bulls just aren't in the place right now that they're doing that for Matas Buzelis at the NBA level. But it's just watching yesterday's game, seeing him out there, and you could see him on the bench when there was a specific moment where Patrick Williams went back down to sit down. And he sat down next to Matas Buzelis, and the look on Matas' face, not because of Patrick Williams, but I'm saying because it was on Patrick Williams, but this guy looked like a guy who's just like, hey, I got my dream of playing in the NBA, of making it to the NBA. I'm playing for the franchise that I rooted for as a kid. And he just looked like a guy that's just like, damn. Like, and you do not want to ruin the confidence of a player like Matas Buzelis. Now, I'm not saying that that's necessarily happening. I'm just saying in just that moment of seeing that like 5-second video is just like, damn, Matas. Like, I felt for the kid, right? And so the Bulls really do need a plan when it comes to Matas Buzelis. This is your 11th overall draft pick. And what people think that he has one of the highest upsides on this team. And while I'm not saying that, especially while you're trying to win basketball games, the minutes aren't there to maybe just give Matas the minutes to just figure it out. But you got to make sure that you have a plan to try to develop this kid. You have to. And let's see if the Bulls are going to do that. But all right, God, that's my time for today. Make sure you guys are following the show at Bulls Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns. BullsCentralPod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and or voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, but that's thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.